The Alpha King tore Kessara Venn's moon boundary thread because one silver line looked too small to protect a kingdom. It snapped without sound. That was what made the court laugh. No thunder, no wall collapse, no enemy wolves pouring through the snow. Only a thin strand of moon-silver light breaking between Kessara's hands as Border Warden Mela Rusk lifted her black iron blade from the northern seam wall. The War Council applauded. Kessara did not move. The broken ends of the thread curled against her palms like wounded light, still warm from all the nights she had spent walking the border alone while soldiers slept in watchtowers and captains drank beneath victory banners. Her fingers were raw from frost. Her boots were white with old snow. Her cloak smelled of pine smoke, cold stone, and the quiet places where weak borders whispered before they failed. Mela Rusk turned toward the council with a smile sharp enough to cut twice. "There," she said. "The wall still stands." A few officers laughed harder. The northern seam wall rose behind them, black and immense, carved from old basalt and moonbone, stretching across the ridge where Holt territory met the dead forest. War banners snapped from its towers. Spears shone along the parapet. Iron gates stood locked and proud. To men who loved iron, the wall looked unbreakable. To Kessara, it looked tired. That was the difference between guarding a border and listening to one. Mela pointed the blade toward the broken thread. "This is what she has wasted royal silver on. A woman's superstition, a shining hair tied to stone." Kessara closed her fist around one severed end. "It is not tied to stone." Mila's eyes cooled. "Then what is it tied to?" The places stone stopped holding. The laughter thinned, but it did not stop. At the center of the war court, Alpha King Darric Holt stood beneath the northern arch with his black wolf cloak falling from one shoulder and frost caught in the silver clasps at his throat. He was broad, severe, and silent, with battle scars crossing one cheek and eyes the pale gray of winter before a storm. His wolf shadow stretched long across the snow behind him, larger than any man's shadow should have been. It had been restless since dawn. Kessara had noticed. No one else had. Darric looked at the wall, then the cut thread, then her hands. "The border holds." Kessara felt those 3 words more sharply than Mela's blade. "The border is holding its breath," she said. One of the war captains scoffed. "Now, the wall breathes?" "Living borders do." Mela gave a soft laugh. "Majesty, this is why the seamkeepers were removed from war authority 3 winters ago. They speak in riddles when soldiers need roads, towers, and teeth." Kessara looked toward the lower ridge, where smoke rose from the villages beyond the wall. Beyond. That was how the council named them. Too far from the gate to be worth counting first. Close enough to pay tribute. Close enough to send sons to the war pack. Too inconvenient to be called protected when maps were drawn in warm rooms. "The villages outside the wall sit on the oldest seam," Kessara said. "If the thread breaks, the border will not fail where your towers stand. It will fail where people live." Mela's smile vanished. "The villages outside the wall are buffer settlements. They are pack lives." The words landed badly. "Good." Darric's gaze moved to the smoke beyond the ridge. For one breath, Kessara thought he heard the difference. Then Mela stepped closer to him. "Majesty, the council requested this test because fear has been spreading through the lower settlements. Seamkeeper Venn tells villagers the border needs her little thread more than it needs your warriors. If we let this continue, every weak house outside the wall will believe itself equal to the crown." Kessara turned her head slowly. "Equal to being counted." Mela ignored her. "The border must be seen as strong." "There it is," Kessara said. "Seen?" Darric's wolf shadow shifted across the snow. His jaw tightened. Kessara saw conflict move through him, then vanish under the weight of a crown that had forgotten how to admit doubt in public. "Show me the breach," he said. Kessara lifted the broken thread. "You cut the thing that showed it." Mela stepped forward. "Convenient." "No," Kessara said. "Expensive." The War Council muttered. Darric's eyes sharpened. "Can you restore it?" Kessara looked at him. Not softly, not hopefully. "You ask after allowing it to be cut." His face hardened. He did not apologize. She had not expected him to. A king who listened only after damage would call regret strategy if no one stopped him. Kessara turned back to the wall. The moon boundary thread had run along the living seam between territory and hunger. Too thin for proud men, too bright for liars. It did not make the wall strong. It did not bless kings. It did not choose queens. It held pressure, which stones carried old bites, which gaps had been sealed with moonwork instead of mortar, which villages stood behind promises too quiet for war maps. She pressed the severed ends together. They did not join. Instead, the thread rose. A silver line lifted from her palms into the air, unwinding upward as if the sky itself had caught the broken strand. It stretched along the wall, then beyond it, then over the lower ridge where village smoke trembled in the cold. The laughter died. The northern seam wall gave one deep sound. Not collapse. Release. A crack opened beside the eastern tower, thin as a wolf's claw, then another near the lower gate, then 3 more across the ridge, each one flashing silver, where the moon thread had been hiding weakness beneath the stone. Darric's wolf shadow jerked. The snow between his boots split in a bright seam. He looked down. A silver line ran around him in a broken circle. The border was not outside the court anymore. It had unstitched around the king. Mila's face went pale. Kessara looked at the rising thread as it pulled every hidden gap into moonlight. One silver warning burned across the air above the wall. Lower ridge gaps were held by moon thread before the war council tested the wall. Darric looked from the broken circle at his feet to Kessara Venn, standing with blood on her palms and silver light around her fingers. His voice did not soften. What gaps was my wall hiding? Mela Rusk answered before the silver circle around the king's boots finished burning into the snow. Old stress lines, she said. The words came smoothly, but her hand still gripped the black iron blade too tightly. Across the northern seam wall, thin silver cracks glowed in places no war captain had bothered to watch. Beside the eastern tower, under the lower gate, along the ridge path where village smoke rose beyond the wall. The moon boundary thread hung in the air above them, severed and unwinding, not falling apart, not healing, only showing what had been forced to hold too long. Alpha King Darric Holt did not step out of the broken circle at his feet. What gaps was my wall hiding? He asked again. Mela bowed her head. Majesty, the wall is old. Every northern structure carries stress. Seamkeepers call cracks breaches because their authority depends on fear. Kessara Venn stood with blood warming her palms and silver light curling between her fingers. She looked at the cracks. Not at Darric. The wall does not glow for age, she said. It glows for pressure. One captain laughed, though no one joined him. Pressure from what? Snow? From what crossed near it, Kessara said. The laughter died fully then. Darric's wolf shadow stretched behind him, restless and too large. Its ears flattened toward the lower ridge, where smoke from the outer villages bent sideways in the wind. Maela noticed where he looked. The lower ridge is beyond formal defense line. Kessara turned to her. Formal defense line. That is the phrase men use when they want distance to sound lawful. Maela's eyes sharpened. The ridge villages were placed outside the wall generations ago for strategic depth. They were placed outside the wall because the first wall builders were afraid of admitting the seam ran under homes, not towers. The silver thread above them trembled. A thin line shot from Kessara's bloodied palm toward the eastern tower crack. It did not repair the stone. It simply held light over the fracture until every officer could see the old moonwork beneath the basalt, layer after layer of silver pressure knots, buried where mortar had failed. Darric looked at it. Read it. Kessara did not move. He had allowed the thread cut. He had let Mela make maintenance into theater. He had listened only when the border wrapped a broken circle around his own boots. You ask because the wall answered, she said, not because the villages did. His jaw tightened. He did not apologize. Good. She would not have believed him while smoke still rose from the ridge he had not counted. Kessara lifted one hand toward the eastern crack. The thread does not accuse. It does not name traitors. It does not solve a living border by itself. Mela gave a thin smile. At last, honesty. Kessara looked at her. It shows pressure. The silver line pulsed. Eastern tower crack. The first gap brightened. Lower gate seam. The second opened wider. Not enough to break, enough to show silver beneath stone. Village smoke line. The thread arced beyond the wall toward the lower ridge. A murmur moved through the war council. Darric's eyes narrowed. Why would village smoke be tied to the border? Because people breathe where borders are supposed to hold. Mela stepped forward. Poetry is not defense. No, Kessara said. Neither is a wall that forgot its people. Darric looked toward the lower ridge again. Continue. Kessara drew the severed thread through her fingers. Pain cut across her palm as moonlight tightened over open skin. She kept her voice even. Wolf, shadow circle. The silver ring around Darric's boots flared. His wolf shadow jerked like something had bitten it. Moonwork pressure. The hidden knots beneath the wall lit one by one, stretching not toward the towers, but toward the village smoke beyond the official gate road. Myla said, Seam keeper markings often follow old settlement lines. It proves nothing. Kessara turned slowly, then bring the war map. No one moved. That was answer enough. Darric looked at the nearest captain. Bring it. A map table was carried from beneath the northern arch, its iron legs biting into the snow. A leather war map lay across it, weighted by dagger handles. The towers were marked. The gates were marked. The patrol roads were marked. The dead forest was marked in black ink. The lower ridge villages were not there. Only blank snow. Kessara felt the old anger rise, cold and clean. There, Myla said quickly. Outer settlements are kept on tribute ledgers, not war maps. Kessara looked at Darric. A wall does not protect people it has already stopped naming. The words struck him, not like insult, like recognition arriving late enough to be shameful. His wolf shadow lowered its head toward the map. The moon boundary thread rose higher, stretching from the cracked wall to the blank space where the villages should have been. Silver light burned through the leather. One by one, names appeared in the empty snow. Rilfin, Cromere, Lowhearth, Stonebend, Aldersmoke. 5 villages, 5 lives made plural, 5 places Mela had called buffer. Darric stared at the names. Who removed them? Mela answered too quickly. Map revisions passed through the border office for military clarity. Kessara looked at the thread. Clarity is a clean word for disappearance. The thread held sequence. Eastern tower crack. Lower gate seam. Village smoke line. Wolf shadow circle. Moonwork pressure. Blank var map. Names burned back into leather. The northern seam wall groaned again, and the silver cracks across the lower ridge brightened like wounds opening under moonlight. Then a warning wrote itself across the war map in cold silver fire. Lower ridge villages were removed from the war map before the wall test. Maela Rusk went still. Darric looked from the burned village names to the border warden's blade. His voice did not soften. Why were pack lives erased before my wall was cut? The war map smoked where the village names had burned back into the leather. Rilfen, Cromere, Lowhearth, Stonebend, Aldersmoke. 5 names in silver fire, shining in the blank snow the War Council had called empty. Border Warden Mela Rusk did not look at them for long. Outer settlements are kept on civil ledgers, she said. Their absence from a war map does not erase their lives. Kessara Venn looked at the village smoke beyond the wall. No, it only makes them easier to lose. Alpha King Darric Holt stood inside the broken silver circle at his feet. His wolf shadow stretched low behind him like a beast, bracing against a scent it should have recognized sooner. Why were pack lives erased before my wall was cut? He asked. Mela bowed. For command clarity, Majesty. War maps mark defensible positions. The lower ridge villages cannot be reinforced quickly in the event of a northern breach. They pay winter tribute, Kessara said. Mela's eyes cooled. Tribute does not change terrain. No, Kessara said. It only proves the crown knew where to collect from people it did not bother to defend. The captains shifted. Darric's gaze moved from the map to Kessara. Read the map. She did not step toward it at once. He had allowed the thread to be cut before asking what it had held. He had stood beneath the wall and believed iron, because iron looked loyal in public. You ask the map now, she said, because names burned through it. His jaw tightened. He did not apologize. Good. The lower ridge did not need his shame. It needed his attention. Kessara lifted the severed moon boundary thread. The silver strand trembled between her fingers, still broken, still unwilling to close what had been torn for spectacle. The thread cannot tell why men lied, she said. It can show where pressure changed. Mela gave a dry laugh. So we return to riddles. Kessara turned to the map table. No, we return to the line you moved. The moon thread rose from her palm and touched the leather map. Silver light traveled over the towers first, then the lower gate, then the blank area where the villages had been restored. It stopped at a row of small iron patrol pins along the wall's inner road. Kessara read softly. Old patrol line. The pins glowed. Village smoke line. Silver light stretched beyond the wall. Map revision. The 5 restored names flared. Patrol withdrawal. The iron pins slid backward across the leather. Not by hand, by memory. Every captain watched as the marked patrol line moved away from the lower ridge and settled inside the wall, leaving all 5 villages beyond the first response route. Mela's mouth tightened. Standard winter consolidation. Kessara looked at her. Then why did the tribute road remain open? The moon thread snapped toward a narrow ink road running from Low Hearth to the western gate. It burned silver along the path, then red where tally marks had been pressed into the map margin. Tribute collected. Patrol withdrawn. Villages unnamed. The order of it made the air colder. Darric looked at the red marks. Those are current? Kessara nodded. Last moon. Myla said, supply levies are not border defense. They are pack obligation, Kessara said. You cannot take grain from outside the wall and call the hands that grew it outside the pack. A low sound moved through Darric's wolf shadow. The snow around the silver circle darkened beneath it. Kessara saw the king hear that sound before he understood it. His wolf had known. Not the details, not the map, but the rot. The living border had been pressing warning into his blood for months, and pride had taught the man to name it restlessness. Darric looked at Mela. Were lower ridge patrols withdrawn before the wall test? Mela's answer came too cleanly. Patrols were repositioned after risk review. Before the test? Before unnecessary panic spread. Kessara looked at the moon thread. Before witnesses could compare the gaps to the missing patrols. Mela's face hardened. Careful, seamkeeper. Kessara looked at the black wall where silver cracks glowed like thin, opened eyes. I was careful for 7 winters. That is why your wall is still standing. No one laughed. The moon boundary thread lifted higher. It ran from the eastern tower crack to the lower gate seam, from the lower gate to the restored village names, from the names to the retreating patrol pins, then back to the silver circle around Darric's boots. It did not accuse Mela. Not yet. It held sequence. Lower ridge names removed. Village tribute collected. Patrol line withdrawn. Moonwork pressure increased. Wall test ordered. Thread cut. The war map brightened until every officer had to look at the space between protection and collection. Then the silver warning burned across the leather. Lower ridge patrols were withdrawn after the villages were removed from the war map. Maya la Rusk went still. Darric looked from the withdrawn patrol pins to the smoking village names. His voice did not soften. Who ordered my patrols away from pack lives, still paying tribute? Mela Rusk lowered the black iron blade to her side. Not enough to look guilty. Enough to stop it from trembling. Across the war map, the lower ridge villages still burned in silver. Rilfin, Cromere, Low Hearth, Stonebend, Alder Smoke. The patrol pins had moved inward, away from the smoke lines beyond the northern seam wall. Behind Alpha King Darric Holt, his wolf shadow crouched low in the snow, restless and broad, its ears fixed toward the ridge as if it could hear what his officers had stopped reporting. Darric's voice did not soften. Who ordered my patrols away from pack lives still paying tribute? Mela bowed. Rotational command, Majesty. Northern patrols are adjusted by season, snow pressure, scout risk, and available riders. Kessara Venn looked at the 5 village names glowing on the map. Available riders were not the reason. Myla's eyes cut toward her. You do not command patrol rosters. No, Kessara said. I held the seam they stopped riding. A captain near the table muttered. Holding thread is not holding territory. Kessara turned her head. Then why did the territory open when the thread was cut? No one answered. Darric looked at the map. Bring the patrol roster. Mela's jaw tightened. Majesty, patrol rosters are operational documents. And this is my border. A runner went beneath the northern arch and returned with a long slate of dark wood, its surface carved with patrol paths, rider names, moon dates, and weather marks. It smelled of horse sweat, oil, and cold iron. Mela reached for it. Darric did not let her take it. He placed it on the map table himself. Kessara looked at the roster from where she stood with broken moon thread curled against her bloodied palms. The silver strand had dimmed slightly. Torn living boundaries did not shine forever for court convenience. Every moment they spent arguing over language, the lower ridge stayed open. Darric saw her glance toward the wall. Read it. She did not move at once. He had asked, read, too many times after allowing Mela to cut the thing that read first. You ask the roster now because your patrol pins moved in front of you, Kessara said. Not because the villages asked for riders before snow closed the ravines. His jaw tightened. Still no apology. Good. She had no use for a king's guilt, while gaps breathed in the dark. Kessara lifted one severed thread end and laid it across the roster. The thread cannot read loyalty, she said. It reads pressure left where duty was removed. Mela gave a cold smile, a poetic way to say nothing. Kessara pressed the thread harder. Silver light ran down the roster. Lower Ridge Route. 5 carved paths glowed. Village Tribute Road. The red tally marks on the map answered. Patrol withdrawal. The route lines dimmed. Gap warning filed. A small mark appeared beside Kessara's name in the margin. Darric leaned closer. You filed warnings? For 7 winters. Mela's voice sharpened. Seam observations, not military breach reports. Kessara looked at her. Because your office would not accept breach reports from a seamkeeper. Mela turned to Darric. Majesty, the border office separates craft notices from war intelligence for clarity. Clarity, Kessara said, has buried many bodies before snow did. The wolf shadow behind Darric growled. Not loudly. Enough for every captain to stop breathing. Kessara drew the thread across the roster margin. One by one, small silver knots appeared beside dates. Warnings she had filed when moonwork pressure increased near Lower Gate, when village dogs stopped crossing the seam, when old pine roots blackened overnight, when tracks appeared where no Holt patrol had ridden. Darric stared at the marks. These were never brought to council. Mela bowed her head, because they were maintenance notices. They named gaps, Kessara said. They named sensations. They named where scouts would walk if patrols were moved. That landed. Mela's mouth tightened. The thread burned brighter over the last warning. It had been filed 3 nights before the War Council requested the wall test. Kessara read it aloud. Lower ridge seam under enemy weight. Patrol line must remain beyond village smoke until full moon pass. Darric's gaze moved slowly to Mela. Mela answered before he spoke. Enemy weight is not proof of enemy presence. No, Kessara said. It is proof the border felt feet that did not belong. The moon thread lifted from the roster and snapped toward the black iron blade in Mela's hand. Mela moved the blade back. Toe latte. A silver line touched the hilt and revealed a small stamped mark near the guard. The border warden seal, pressed over black wax and worn almost flat from use. Darric's eyes narrowed. Your seal. Mela's voice was steady. All patrol adjustments bear my office seal. Kessara looked at the glowing roster. Not all are pressed over seam warnings. The thread held sequence. Gap warning filed. Border warden seal applied. Patrol route withdrawn. Villages left outside first response. War Council wall test requested. Moon boundary thread cut. The northern seam wall groaned again. Far beyond the lower gate, village smoke bent sharply east, as if something unseen had moved through the trees. Silver fire burned across the patrol roster. Patrol withdrawal was sealed after Kessara's lower ridge gap warnings were filed. My la rusquen still. Darric looked from the seal mark to the dark forest beyond the villages. His voice did not soften. What crossed my lower ridge after those patrols were pulled? The dead forest answered before Mela Rusk did. Far beyond the lower gate, where village smoke bent east over the ridge, something dark moved between the pines and vanished. Not a wolf. Not wind. Too narrow for bear. Too careful for deer. The kind of movement a soldier learned to miss when he had already decided a place was empty. Kessara Venn saw it. Alpha King Darric Holt's wolf shadow saw it too. It rose behind him with its hackles lifted, huge and pale against the snow, its head fixed toward the lower ridge where 5 villages had burned back onto the war map. Mela's voice stayed smooth. Old crossings, Majesty. The dead forest throws shadows when snow glare shifts. Kessara looked at the glowing patrol roster. Shadows do not wait for patrols to leave. The War Council went silent. Darric did not step out of the silver circle around his boots. The broken moon boundary thread still held that ring in the snow, not trapping him, not accusing him, only proving the border had opened close enough to touch the crown. What crossed my lower ridge after those patrols were pulled? He asked again. Mela bowed. Likely ridge scavengers. The lower seam has always drawn hungry things from the dead forest. Kessara looked at her. Hungry things do not avoid warning bells. One captain frowned. The lower ridge bells have not sounded in weeks. No, Kessara said, because the bells were moved behind the wall with the patrols. The captain stopped speaking. Darric's eyes cut to the map. The bells were moved? Mila answered quickly. Temporarily consolidated during winter risk. Kessara's laugh came out too soft to be humor. Risk does not become safer because you stop listening for it. The moon thread in her hand trembled. The severed end curled toward the lower gate seam, then toward the restored village names, then beyond them into the blank edge of the dead forest. It did not pull hard enough to drag her. It invited her to look. She knew better than to mistake invitation for mercy. A living border showed what it could, not what the court was ready to survive. Darric turned to her. Read it. Kessara did not move. You keep asking the broken thing to serve after you let them cut it, she said. His jaw tightened. He did not apologize. Good. Apologies did not close crossings. They only made kings feel less alone beside them. Kessara stepped to the edge of the map table and laid the severed thread across the lower ridge names. The thread cannot name every enemy, she said. It reads pressure, direction, and what the seam had to bear without patrol. Mela's mouth curved. So it cannot prove scouts. No, Kessara said. It can prove feet that knew where not to step. The silver light ran across the leather map. Lower ridge patrol withdrawn. The inner patrol pins glowed. Warning bells moved behind wall. Small bronze bell marks slid inward, away from Rilfin and Cromere. Village smoke line. The 5 names brightened. Seam pressure. The cracks along the northern seam wall pulsed. Crossing weight. The thread shot toward the dead forest. The snow between the lower gate and the pines darkened, not with blood, with memory. Silver footprints appeared one by one across the ridge path, each print narrow, angled, and placed between old moon knots where a careless step would have woken the seam. A captain swore under his breath. Mela said, Poachers. Kessara shook her head. Poachers do not walk around boundary knots they cannot see. Darric stared at the footprints. How many? Kessara followed the line as it burned through snow. 3 first. 3 silver paths crossed from the dead forest toward Low Hearth. Then 2 returned. 2 lines crossed back, deeper, slower, carrying weight. The village smoke bent again. One of the restored names on the map, Cromere, flickered, as if something cold passed over it. Kessara's throat tightened. Darric noticed. What weight? She pressed the thread against her bleeding palm. Silver light sharpened. The footprints changed, not into bodies, into traces, a broken latch mark, a strip of torn gray wool, the shadow of a grain sack dragged over snow, a child's wooden charm snapped in half near the ridge road. Kessara went still. Mela spoke before anyone else could feel the horror of it. Outer village losses are common in winter. Hunger, theft, and family disputes. Enemy scouts crossed near Cromere, Kessara said. They carried supplies out through the seam. Mela's face hardened. You cannot know they were enemy scouts. The border knows the difference between hunger leaving and intent entering. Darric's wolf shadow growled, low and shaking. The sound rolled through the snow, through the wall, through every captain who had once sworn that the lower ridge was beyond formal defense. Kessara read the sequence because someone had to keep the pain from becoming only rage. Gap warning filed. The old silver knot flared beside her name. Border warden seal applied. Mela's seal mark glowed on the roster. Patrols withdrawn. The pins burned inward. Bells moved. The bronze marks shifted away from the villages. Enemy crossing. The silver footprints appeared again. Supplies taken through Cromere Road. The torn charm flickered and vanished. Mela's voice cut sharp. No scout report confirms this. Kessara looked at her. Because the scouts crossed where you removed the watchers. The moon boundary thread lifted into the air. It stretched from the patrol roster to the war map, from the war map to the lower gate seam, from the lower gate seam out to the dead forest where silver footprints burned across untouched snow. Then one warning wrote itself in cold light above the map. Enemy scouts crossed the lower ridge after patrols and warning bells were pulled behind the wall. Mela Rusk went very still. Darric looked from the silver footprints to the black iron blade she still held. His voice did not soften. Who showed them where the moon knots slept? Mela Rusk smiled, as if the question had finally become useful. Not safe. Useful. Around the war map, silver footprints still burned across the lower ridge path where enemy scouts had crossed after the patrols and warning bells were pulled behind the northern seam wall. Village names smoked in cold light. Rilfin, Cromere, Low Hearth, Stonebend, Alder Smoke. 5 places the council had called blank until the broken moon boundary thread forced them back into the king's sight. Alpha King Darric Holt's voice did not soften. Who showed them where the moon knots slept? Mela turned toward Kessara Venn. Slowly, the war council turned with her. A seam keeper would know that, Mela said, would she not? The sentence landed like a blade, placed gently on a table. Kessara felt the old shape of accusation before it fully opened. Maintenance work was invisible when it saved men, visible only when they needed a throat to close around blame. Darric's wolf shadow lifted its head behind him. His eyes went to Kessara, not trusting, not condemning, waiting. That hurt more than it should have. Kessara looked at the silver footprints instead. I know where moon knots breathe. Mela's smile sharpened, and enemy scouts knew where they slept. I file sleeping knots. I do not guide teeth through them. One captain muttered, but she could. Kessara turned toward him. Every wall can be opened by the person who understands it. That is why kings should learn the difference between keeper and traitor before cutting the keeper's hands bloody. No one answered. Darric looked at the broken thread curled through her fingers. Can the thread show who marked the knots? She looked at him then, not softly. You ask because Mela found a blame that fits in your court's mouth. His jaw tightened. He did not apologize. Good. The lower ridge did not need comfort dressed as regret. It needed the truth before the dead forest sent more than scouts. Kessara stepped to the edge of the war map. The moon boundary thread was dimmer now, thinner where it had risen into the air. A living seam did not reveal endlessly. Every proof pulled pressure from the wall itself. The thread cannot read intent, she said. It can read touch. Mela gave a low laugh, then let it touch her. Kessara held out her own hands first. Blood. Frost. Moon silver burns. The thread glowed around her fingers, then settled into a clean, pale line. Seam keeper touch, she said. Repair pressure, blood warmth, moonwork hold. The silver line did not darken. She laid the thread across the first enemy footprint. The light changed. Not silver, black silver, as if moonlight had been mixed with oil. Kessara's breath caught. Darric saw it. What? Boundary sleep mark. Mela lifted her chin. A seam keeper mark. No. Kessara looked closer. A seam keeper can quiet a moon knot only by holding pressure over it. This was smeared. She drew the thread through the footprint. A narrow black crescent appeared beside the print, half buried in snow memory. Travel mark, she said. Mela's face cooled. Hunters use crescents. Hunters do not mark moon knots with border pitch. The words changed the air. Darric looked at Mela. Border pitch? Kessara nodded toward the wall towers. Used by wardens to seal gate hinges, bell mouths, blade sheaths, and patrol tokens against frost. It smells of iron pine and old smoke. She raised the thread. A faint black sheen clung to the silver. Enemy scout step, she read. The footprint flared. Moon knot asleep. The hidden knot beneath the snow dimmed. Border pitch smear. The black crescent sharpened. Safe crossing. The print line continued toward Cromere. Mela said, pitch is common along the wall. Not beyond the wall, Kessara said. Not on knots. The war map pretended we're not protecting anyone. The wolf shadow behind Darric growled. This time, no one mistook it for wind. Kessara moved the thread from footprint to footprint. Each one revealed another black crescent, always before the narrowest gaps, always beside moon knots that should have woken the seam if crossed by enemy weight. Not all the ridge, only the safe path. The scouts had not guessed. They had followed marks. Darric's voice dropped. Who carries border pitch beyond the wall? Mela answered too quickly. Wardens, patrol riders, gate crews, repair hands, any number of loyal servants. Kessara looked at the black iron blade in Mela's hand. And the blade that cut my thread. Mela's knuckles whitened. Kessara did not need to touch the blade yet. Not yet. The thread had not earned that much from her strength. She pressed the broken strand to the war map instead. Silver light ran from the patrol roster to the withdrawn bells, from the withdrawn bells to the enemy footprints, from the footprints to the black crescents beside sleeping moon knots. It held sequence. Gap warning filed. Patrols withdrawn. Warning bells moved. Moon knots marked with border pitch. Enemy scouts crossed safely. Cromere Road stripped. The council stared at the black crescents now appearing across the leather map, each one a small, deliberate wound. Mela's voice was colder. This proved someone misused border supplies. Nothing more. Kessara met her eyes. Nothing more is always where guilty people ask the court to stop. The moon boundary thread rose higher, trembling hard enough that Kessara felt it pull against the cuts in her palms. Above the lower ridge names, silver fire opened into one clear warning. Enemy scouts followed border pitch marks placed beside sleeping moon knots. Maya la rusk wen still. Darric looked from the black crescents to the border warden's blade. His voice did not soften. Whose hand carried warden pitch outside the wall? Mela Rusk did not lower the blade this time. She should have. Every eye in the war court had turned toward the black iron edge in her hand, the same blade that had cut Kessara Venn's moon boundary thread before the council laughed. Snow gathered along its spine. Near the hilt, a dull smear of black pitch clung beneath the guard, too small for proud men to notice. Kessara noticed. She had spent 7 winters noticing what men called too small. Alpha King Darric Holt stood inside the silver circle still burned around his boots. His wolf shadow stretched toward the lower ridge, ears pinned, hackles raised, as if the beast wanted to leap the wall and hunt the footprints itself. His voice did not soften. Whose hand carried warden pitch outside the wall? Mela bowed with her blade still at her side. Any hand with duty to the border, Majesty. Warden pitch travels with patrol repairs, gate sealing, bell housing, hinge frost, supply sleds. It is not a signature. Kessara looked at the black crescents glowing along the map. No, but pressure is. Mela's eyes sharpened. You would read guilt from a smear? I read passage from a path. The war council shifted uneasily. Darric turned to Kessara. Can the thread show the hand? She did not answer quickly. The severed moon boundary thread had dimmed to a thin silver pulse between her bloodied fingers. The lower ridge cracks still glowed. The wall still breathed open in places where her work had hidden weakness for years. If she pulled too much truth from the seam, the border itself might lose what little strength remained. You keep asking what the thread can show, she said. You have not yet asked what showing costs it. Darric's jaw tightened. No apology came. Good. The lower ridge had no time for a king learning humility in slow pieces. Kessara lifted the thread. It cannot name a heart. It can read touch, weight, angle, and what pressure crossed from tool to border. Maella gave a cold smile. Then read. Let the wall decide whether I walked every path in the north. Kessara looked at her. The wall does not decide. It remembers being used. She laid the silver thread across the first black crescent on the map. Border pitch mark. The crescent sharpened. Sleeping moon knot. The hidden knot beneath the snow dimmed. Enemy step. The narrow footprint burned. Tool pressure. A thin dark line appeared beside the crescent, angled like a blade tip, pressed and lifted. The captains leaned closer. Maella said, Wardens mark with knives. Kessara nodded once. Some do. She moved the thread to the second crescent. The same angled line appeared. Then the third. Then the fourth. Each mark carried the same pressure. A left-hand push, a narrow tip, a small hesitation at the end, where the blade dragged through snow crust before lifting away. Darric looked at Mela's blade. She saw him look. Many blades are black iron, she said. Kessara held out her hand. Then, lay it down. Mela's face hardened. This is a warden blade, and this is a warden crime. The air snapped tight. Darric's voice came low. "Give her the blade." Mela did not move. For one breath, the whole wall seemed to listen. Then she placed the black iron blade on the map table. Kessara did not touch the edge. She had already bled enough for men's proof. She set the moon thread across the blade's tip. The silver strand went black-silver at once. The same oily moonlight that had appeared in the enemy footprints crawled up the metal. Kessara read it, voice steady, though her palm burned. Border pitch beneath guard. The hilt glowed. Thread, cut pressure. A bright break flared where Myla had severed the moon boundary thread. Lower ridge mark pressure. The blade tip answered with the same angled drag. Mela said, "A blade used to cut thread carries thread memory. That proves nothing beyond this performance." Kessara looked at Darric. "Bring snow from the lower ridge path." A runner hesitated. Darric's eyes flashed. "Go." The runner went through the lower gate with 2 wolf guards. The court waited beneath the black wall, listening to the living border groan in the cold. No one laughed now. The sound of silence had changed. It no longer protected power. It waited for it to bleed. When the runner returned, he carried a shallow iron bowl filled with snow darkened by border pitch. Kessara placed the bowl beside the blade. The moon thread trembled, not toward the snow, toward the blade. A silver line leapt from the bowl to the tip, then to the black crescents on the map, then to the broken thread in Kessara's hand. It held sequence. Blade dipped in warden pitch. Moon knots marked outside wall. Enemy scouts followed safe path. Cromere, road stripped. War Council wall test requested. Moon boundary thread cut. The northern seam wall shuddered. Far beyond the ridge, one village smoke line vanished for a breath behind the dark trees, then returned thin and shaking. Kessara felt fear move through her ribs. Not for herself, for people still being called buffer while the court examined tools. The silver warning burned across the black blade. Mela Rusk's warden blade marked the safe path beside sleeping moon knots. Mela's face went white with fury, not fear. Darric looked from the blade to the lower ridge smoke. His voice did not soften. "What did the scouts give for the path through my border?" Mela Rusk looked at the silver warning burned across her own blade and did not deny the mark. That was clever. Denial would have made her small. Instead, she became official. "Border wardens confiscate enemy goods," she said. "If scouts crossed near Cromere, then anything taken from them may have touched my records, my blade, or my patrol stores." Kessara Venn stared at the black iron blade where the moon thread still glowed against the tip. Mela Rusk's warden blade marked the safe path beside sleeping moon knots. The words shone bright enough to stain the snow silver. Alpha King Darric Holt stood inside the broken circle around his boots. His wolf shadow crouched low behind him, its shape larger now, less like a shadow than a warning given fur and teeth. "What did the scouts give for the path through my border?" he asked again. Mela bowed. "Nothing was given. Scouts carry payment when they intend to buy treason. Finding coin on enemy bodies does not mean the coin was accepted." Kessara looked toward the lower ridge. The smoke from Cromere had returned, but thinly, too thinly. The living seam still breathed open in silver cracks along the wall, and every breath felt like time being spent from someone else's roof. "Then show the confiscation ledger," she said. Mela's eyes moved to her. "Only once." Darric saw it. "Bring it." A captain hesitated. "Majesty, border confiscation ledgers are held under warden lock." Darric did not look away from Mela. "Then unlock them." Mela's mouth tightened, but she drew a small black key from beneath her cloak and passed it to the captain. The key looked ordinary. Kessara did not trust ordinary things in the hands of people who sold danger as order. The captain returned with a narrow iron ledger sealed in frost-dark wax. Its cover was stamped with the border office mark, a wall, a wolf, and 3 northern stars. Darric broke the seal himself. Myla's expression did not change. That made Kessara colder. The ledger opened to columns of seized goods: enemy knives, bone charms, forest salt, scout rings, black fletching, coated leather strips, neat lines, clean ink, the kind of order that made crime look handled. Darric pushed the ledger toward Kessara. "Read it." She did not move. "You want the ledger because her blade answered," she said, "not because Cromere lost supplies." His jaw tightened. No apology came. Good. Apologies would not put grain back in village hands. Kessara laid the severed moon boundary thread across the open ledger. The thread flickered weakly. She felt the cost in her palms, in the silver burn spreading under skin. The living border was not a witness box. It was a wounded thing being asked to bleed meaning. The thread cannot weigh greed, she said. It can read what crossed the seam and what was recorded after. Mela said, then it will show confiscation. Maybe. Silver light ran over the ledger. Enemy crossing. The footprints on the map flared. Safe path marked. The black crescents beside the moon knots appeared again. Cromere road stripped. The torn charm and grain drag shadow flickered. Scout goods entered. Several ledger lines glowed pale. Mela lifted her chin. Then the thread darkened over one entry. Not pale. Black silver. Kessara leaned closer. The line named 3 enemy scout rings and 1 pouch of dead forest silver. The amount was too high for ordinary scouts, too heavy for men only testing a path. Darric saw the number. That was confiscated? Mila said. As recorded. Kessara touched the thread to the margin. Then where are the witness cuts? A confiscation ledger required 3 small knife marks besides seized payment. Finder, counter, crown witness. This entry had only 1. Mela answered smoothly. Field seizure. Full witness marks added later. They were never added. Clerical delay. Kessara looked at her. Clerks have become very useful in this court. The moon thread tightened. The dead forest silver mark lifted from the page and floated above the war map, small and dark, each coin stamped with a crescent split by a wolf tooth. Enemy money, scout money, payment meant to move quietly. The coins spun once. Then silver light jumped from the coin mark to Mela's black key. The key warmed. Darric's eyes narrowed. Why does the payment answer your lock? Mela's face hardened. Because confiscated goods are stored in warden chests. Kessara said. Then open the chest. No one moved. Darric looked at the captain. Open it. The warden chest was brought from the tower storehouse. Black oak banded in iron, frost crusted along its hinges. Maela's key opened it with a reluctant click. Inside lay seized knives, enemy charms, broken arrowheads, packets of dead forest salt. No pouch of scout silver. Only an empty square in the dust, where something heavy had rested and been removed. The War Council went silent. Mela said, transferred to Treasury. Darric looked at the royal treasurer. The old wolf shook his head once. Kessara closed her eyes for half a breath. There it was. Not motive, not yet, but purchase. She laid the moon thread across the empty dust square. It rose sharply, pulling toward Mela's blade, then to the map, then to the lower ridge footprints. The sequence burned cold and clear. Safe path marked. Enemy scouts crossed. Cromere supplies taken. Dead forest silver, recorded as confiscated. No crown witness. No treasury transfer. Payment removed from warden chest. The thread shuddered so hard, blood reopened in Kessara's palm. Darric saw it. His hand moved, then stopped before touching her. Learning, still too late. The warning wrote itself across the open confiscation ledger. Dead forest silver was recorded after the safe path was marked, then removed from the warden chest without crown witness. Mela Rusk's face went still. Darric looked from the empty chest to the silver cracks running along the lower ridge. His voice did not soften. How many gaps did enemy silver buy? The confiscation ledger did not answer with a number first. It answered with weight. The dead forest silver mark hovered above the war map, dark and cold, each coin turning slowly in the air as if moonlight hated touching it. Below, the lower ridge names burned where the War Council had left blank snow. Rilfin, Cromere, Lowhearth, Stonebend, Aldersmoke. Beyond the northern seam wall, the real village smoke bent under a wind that smelled too sharply of pine rot and distant wolves. Kessara Venn stood with the broken moon boundary thread cutting light through her bloodied palms. Alpha King Darric Holt's voice did not soften. How many gaps did enemy silver buy? Mela Rusk folded her hands before her cloak. The black iron blade lay on the map table now, marked by the same moonlight that had exposed the safe path beside sleeping knots. Majesty, she said. No evidence shows purchase, only confiscated silver mishandled after a scout crossing. Kessara looked at the empty square in the warden chest where the pouch should have been. Mishandled is a clean word for stolen twice. Mela's eyes sharpened. Careful. I was careful when your patrols left Cromere without bells. Darric looked toward Kessara. Can the thread count the gaps? She did not answer quickly. The silver strand between her fingers had grown thin, more like breath than thread. Each question dragged truth from a living border already torn open. The wall groaned behind them, low and tired, and the cracks along the lower gate brightened when the wind shifted from the dead forest. You keep asking it to count, she said, after letting them cut the hand that held it. His jaw tightened. No apology came. Good. She needed his command clear, not his guilt pretty. The thread cannot count coin, Kessara said. It can count where the seam was paid to sleep. Mela gave a cold laugh. Paid to sleep. Listen to what your court is becoming, Majesty. Kessara placed the severed thread across the hovering coin mark. Silver light turned black at the edges. Dead forest silver recorded. The confiscation ledger pulsed. No crown witness. The empty chest answered with a hollow flash. Warden key opened. Mela's black key warmed on the table. Safe path marked. The black crescents beside the moon knots burned. Gap asleep. The first seam beneath Cromere dimmed. A narrow wound appeared on the map, not on the wall, but under the village name itself. A place where boundary law had been pressed flat enough for scouts to cross without waking the snow. Kessara's throat tightened. Cromere Gap. Darric's wolf shadow growled. The thread moved again, dragging itself toward Rilfin. Second payment trace. Another coin mark rose from the ledger margin, smaller, hidden beneath an entry for broken scout rings. Mila said, coin collected from enemies often appears in several entries. Kessara looked at her. Then why do all of them answer your key? The black key flared again. The Rilfin seam went dull. Rilfin Gap, Kessara said. A captain swore. That path leads behind the old watch pines. Yes, Kessara said, where your patrols no longer ride. The moon thread trembled, then shot toward Low Hearth. This time, the map resisted. Not because there was no gap, because someone had buried it under iron dust. Kessara saw the dull smear across the leather and felt anger sharpen through her exhaustion. Border ash. Mela's mouth tightened. Used to dry wet map ink. No, used to blind moonwork. She pressed the thread harder. Pain opened her palm again, hot beneath cold light. The ash smear split. A third coin mark rose beneath it. Low Hearth's name flickered, and a black-silver seam opened beside the tribute road. Low Hearth Gap. Darric looked at Mela. 3. Mela lifted her chin. 3 old stress points. That is all. Kessara's eyes went to the remaining villages. Stonebend. Alder Smoke. The moon thread did not move to them. Not yet. It trembled toward the lower gate instead, toward the place where Darric's official wall still looked strongest. Her stomach went cold. Not only villages, she said. Darric followed her gaze. What? The thread pulled from her hand to the lower gate seam. Silver light ran up the black stone, exposing the hidden pressure knots Kessara had tied for years. Most were frayed now. One was completely dark. Mila stepped forward. The lower gate is reinforced. Kessara looked at the dead knot. It was. The dead forest silver spun faster. A fourth trace rose from the ledger, hidden beneath a line for confiscated black fletching. It did not drift toward a village. It drifted toward the lower gate. The war council went still. Darric's wolf shadow lunged against the silver circle around his boots, not breaking it, but straining hard enough to throw snow outward. Kessara read the sequence because if she stopped, fear would do the reading for her. Cromere Gap sold. The first wound burned. Rilfin Gap sold. The second answered. Low Hearth Gap sold. The third opened. Lower gate knot blinded. The dead knot flared black. Patrols withdrawn. The pins stayed behind the wall. Wall test requested. The broken thread in her hand burned. Thread cut before bought gap surfaced. Mela's face lost its color now. Not all of it. Enough. Darric looked at her. You requested the test. Mela bowed too slowly. The council requested assurance. Kessara looked at the blade. You requested a cut. The moon boundary thread rose above the map, shaking hard enough that every silver crack in the northern seam wall answered. Then cold fire rode across the leather, the blade, the empty chest, and the lower gate stone at once. 3 lower ridge gaps and 1 lower gate knot were bought with dead forest silver before the wall test was requested. Far beyond the wall, a horn sounded from Cromere. Not a warning bell, a village horn. Thin, human, terrified. Darric turned toward the lower ridge as the dead forest moved. His voice did not soften. "What comes through a bought gate tonight?" The village horn sounded again. Thin, human, terrified. Beyond the northern seam wall, the smoke over Cromere broke apart as something black moved beneath the trees. Not shadows now, not old stress, not ridge scavengers. Enemy shapes crossed the snow where the moon knots had been marked to sleep, running low between the pines with iron on their backs and dead forest paint across their faces. The War Council froze. Kessara Venn did not. She turned toward the lower ridge with the broken moon boundary thread burning between her bloodied hands, every silver cut in her palms opening again, as if the border itself had reached through her skin. Alpha King Darric Holt stared toward Cromere. "What comes through a bought gate tonight?" Mela Rusk answered with the last defense left to a guilty warden. "Close the lower gate." The command struck the court hard. A captain nodded before thinking. Another reached for the horn rope. The black gate beneath the northern seam wall stood between the protected towers and the villages beyond. If it closed fully, the enemy might be kept outside the official wall. And Cromere, Rilfin, Lowhearth, Stonebend, and Alder Smoke would be left with them. Kessara looked at Mela. "There it is." Myla's eyes flashed. "There what is?" "The price." Darric turned slowly. "Explain." Kessara did not look away from the lower ridge. "She sold gaps outside the wall because she always meant to close the wall after they were used." Mela stepped forward. "Majesty, the wall protects the heart of Holt territory." "No," Kessara said. "It protects whatever you name heart." The moon boundary thread snapped toward the war map. The 5 village names flared silver. Beyond them, the dead forest footprints multiplied, no longer hidden. They crossed toward Cromere in 2 lines, then toward Lowhearth in 1, then toward the lower gate where the blinded knot pulsed black. Darric's wolf shadow rose behind him. Huge, furious, too late. Kessara felt that lateness and refused to let it become the center of the night. She lifted the broken thread. "If I restitch only the royal wall, the villages remain outside the seam." Myla said, "They are outside the wall. They are not outside the pack." The words rang sharper than the horn. Darric looked at the burning village names, then at the lower gate, then at Kessara's bleeding hands. For the first time, he did not ask the thread to show more. "What do you require?" he asked. Kessara's throat tightened. Not because the question was soft, because it was finally placed where it belonged, before command, not after damage. "The villages counted," she said. "On the war map, in patrol law, in tribute law, in border oath. No more buffer settlements, no more lives outside the line while their grain feeds the crown." Mela snapped. "Majesty, expanding the living boundary in the middle of breach will tear the wall open." Kessara turned to Darric. "Leaving them unnamed already did." Another horn sounded from Cromere. Then a scream carried up the ridge. Darric's face changed. Whatever remained of hesitation died there. He stepped out of the silver circle at his feet. The broken ring did not stop him. It opened. "Open the lower gate," he ordered. Mela went white. "Majesty." Riders to Cromere, 2nd line to Lowhearth, 3rd line to Rilfin Road. War captains follow the seamkeeper's markers. The captains stared. Darric's voice dropped into wolf command. Now. The wall erupted into motion. Horns sounded from the towers. Gates groaned open. Holt riders poured through the lower arch into the snow, not away from the villages, but toward them. Darric's wolf shadow ran ahead of them, a dark shape over the ridge, crossing the line his map had once refused to draw. Myela reached for her blade. It was no longer there. The black iron blade lay on the map table, still burning with its accusation. Kessara placed the broken moon thread across the 5 village names. "Name them into the border." Darric turned to the war map. His scarred hand pressed down on the leather beside Cromere. "Cromere is pack." Silverfire rose. "Rilfin is pack." Another line joined. "Lowhearth is pack. Stonebend is pack. Alder Smoke is pack." Each name answered with light, not as decoration, but as weight returned to law. The moon boundary thread lifted from Kessara's hands. Not healed, not whole. Waiting. Kessara understood. A living border did not mend because a king spoke once. It needed root, witness, and kept obligation. Patrol oath, she said. Darric looked at the captains. Lower ridge patrols are restored beyond village smoke. Warning bells return outside the wall. No patrol withdrawal may pass border office alone. Seam. Keepers. Countersign living boundary changes. Mila's face twisted. You give war law to thread, minders? Darric looked at the silver cracks spreading across his wall. I give border law back to those who knew where the border lived. Kessara took one breath. Then she restitched. Not cloth, not stone, the living seam. The moon boundary thread moved from village name to village smoke, from smoke to road, from road to lower gate, from lower gate to tower, from tower to ridge, drawing a silver line that widened around the places Mela had made invisible. Kessara guided it with both hands, and pain broke through her so fiercely her knees struck the snow. Darric moved toward her. She lifted one bloodied hand. Do not touch the thread. He stopped. Then he did the thing she needed instead. He stood between her and Mela. The enemy reached the first sleeping knot and found it awake. Silver light burst from the ridge. Scouts slammed backward into the snow. The bot gaps closed one by one, not gently, but with the hard finality of a mouth refusing poison. At Cromere Road, Holt riders met the enemy line before it reached the village fences. At Lowhearth, the warning bell rang from outside the wall for the first time in 3 winters. The sound was clear, furious, alive. The moon thread flashed across Mela's blade, the confiscation ledger, the empty warden chest, the war map, and the black crescents beside the knots. One final warning burned above the northern seam wall. Border Warden Mela Rusk sold lower ridge gaps and a lower gate knot to enemy scouts, then cut the moon thread to hide the bought paths. Mela's command chain went dark. Darric did not look away from her. Remove her seal. Guards took the border chain from her throat. The black key fell from her hand into the snow. No one picked it up. Kessara lowered her hand slowly. The moon boundary thread now ran not only along the wall, but around the lower ridge villages, silver and living beneath the cold sky. It did not shine prettily. It breathed. It listened. It held. Darric came to stand before her after the riders' horns confirmed the villages still stood. His wolf shadow lowered its head at her feet, not bowing to a queen, recognizing the line it had failed to see. I thought the wall held my kingdom, he said. Kessara's hands shook, but her voice did not. No, people did. The wall only marked where you stopped looking. The words hit him. Good. Let them remain. He turned to the war council and the open gate beyond them. From this night forward, no village that pays tribute, sends riders, keeps bells, or stands on living seam shall be called buffer. Seam keepers hold authority over boundary pressure. War officers may not cut, move, bury, or test moon thread without seam witness. Border maps will name every pack life before naming stone. The captains bowed. Not all willingly. Enough to begin. Kessara looked past them to the smoke rising from Cromere, still thin, but unbroken. Darric's voice lowered only when he spoke to her again. You held my border with something I thought too small to matter. She met his winter-gray eyes. Then do not make me prove small things by breaking them. I will not. She did not forgive him. Not there. Not while the snow still held the shape of bought footsteps. But when the warning bells rang from the lower ridge and the moon thread answered steady beneath village smoke, Kessara let herself breathe. The northern seam wall stood behind her, black and scarred. The living border stood before her, silver and named. And this time, the kingdom had to see both.